Have you ever stayed up late at night, looking up at the ceiling? Maybe you have some really cute glow-in-the-dark stickers or glow-in-the-dark moons and hearts and stars stuck up on your ceiling, or your nightlight or anything, or you look at the moon outside when the night is calm and beautiful, and you wonder to yourself, why do we become so invested in fictional characters? Why do we even fall in love with them? Why do they help us evolve to become better people? Welcome back, my darling flowers, to another late night cozy audio session between you and I. So you can have this video playing on in the background. Just put your headphones or your earphones in. Just have me in the background, okay? And this was such a fascinating rabbit hole, and always will be very fascinating to me, because I've always loved how our, attachment to fictional characters is actually connected to some very real things that we feel about empathy, identity, attachment, imagination, morality, and the way that we as humans construct meaning to it, Sometimes a fictional character can change us more profoundly than a real person ever did, and even impact us to become better people in real life sometimes, or a lot of times. So I wanted to dive into some of the most fascinating reasons as to why that is. Number one, our brains are surprisingly willing to treat fictional people as socially meaningful. When we become immersed in a story, we don't merely experience a character as ink on a page or just an actor on a screen, right? We construct an internal model of them, their personality, motivations, fears, desires, history, mannerisms, contradictions, etc. So when something happens to them, our emotional systems can respond as though we're witnessing a socially meaningful event. And I am definitely going to link our darling Wolf King Valko towards the middle or towards the end of this video, and how it all becomes like a full circle moment. So stay tuned for that, babe, okay? So when we can respond as though we're witnessing a socially meaningful event when something happens to our, beloved fictional characters, that's when we can know intellectually, despite them being fictional, that they don't exist, we can still simultaneously feel feelings of genuine grief, anxiety, protectiveness, jealousy even, affection, or even love. The intellectual knowledge doesn't necessarily cancel the emotional simulation we're experiencing. Fictional characters give us a form of safe intimacy. This one is super interesting because a fictional character can become emotionally intimate without requiring the reciprocal vulnerability that a real relationship or real relationships demand. You can spend 30 hours inside someone's thoughts. You can learn their deepest wounds. You can witness their childhood, their failures, their embarrassing moments, their private hopes. And they never judge you. They never reject you. They never misunderstand your message. They don't suddenly change their mind about you. That creates an unusual kind of one-sided intimacy. It's part of what psychologists call a parasocial relationship, a perceived relationship with someone who doesn't actually participate in the relationship in the same way a real person would. And there's nothing inherently unhealthy about that. Humans have been forming emotional relationships with fictional figures for centuries. Number 3, fiction lets us experience another consciousness. This might be one of the most beautiful things that stories do. You temporarily get to be inside a mind that isn't yours. A brilliant character can make you think, oh my god, I never considered the world this way. A villain can make you understand how someone could rationalize something terrible. A lonely character can make loneliness suddenly comprehensible. A character that is radically different from you can expand your emotional vocabulary. This is one reason fiction can cultivate empathy. You're repeatedly practicing the mental act of asking, what would it feel like to be this person? And that is an extraordinarily human skill. Number 4, we don't just love characters, we use them to explore ourselves. This is where it gets really fascinating. Sometimes the character we're obsessed with represents something inside us that we haven't fully articulated yet. You might adore a character because they embody courage you wish you had, softness you're afraid to show, independence you crave, ambition you've suppressed, emotional intimacy or intensity that you secretly desire. confidence you are learning to develop, rebellion against expectations, vulnerability that you've been taught to hide, a version of yourself that you could potentially become. So when you're fascinated by a character, the question isn't only why do I like them? It can also be what part of me recognizes itself in them or longs to become like them. That is such a powerful question. Number 5. Sometimes we fall in love with the person we could become around them. This is one of my favorite ideas. A fictional character can represent not just a person we want, but a version of ourselves that emerges in relation to them. For example, perhaps you love a character who makes you imagine yourself as more adventurous, more intellectually curious, more emotionally open, more feminine or masculine, more playful, more courageous, more unapologetically yourself. So the fantasy isn't necessarily, I want this fictional person. Sometimes it's, I love who I imagine myself becoming in their presence, and that can be enormously revealing. Number 6. Characters become emotional containers for our own experiences. For instance, sometimes we aren't actually crying because the character itself suffered. We're crying because their suffering gives our own emotions somewhere to go. If a character loses someone, suddenly you're grieving something from your own life. A character finally receives love, you feel something about your own longing to be loved. A character leaves home, you think about your own transition. A character forgives someone, you confront something that you've been holding on to. Fiction gives abstract feelings, a face, voice, storyline, and resolution. That's one reason stories can feel cathartic. Number 7. Fictional characters can become templates for our values. Humans learn partly through imitation. We observe someone behaving courageously and we think, that's what courage looks like. We see someone establish boundaries and think, maybe I'm allowed to do that too. We see a character remain compassionate after suffering and think, I want to become that kind of person. Stories therefore give us moral prototypes. A character can quietly teach you, this is the kind of person I want to be. And sometimes that lesson stays with you for years. Number 8. Stories let us rehearse possible lives. This is one of the deepest functions of fiction. Humans are constantly asking, what could my life be? Fiction gives us thousands of simulated answers. We can experience falling in love, losing someone, becoming powerful, starting over, betraying someone, forgiving someone, becoming a parent, leaving home, finding your community, confronting death, surviving trauma, becoming a completely different person without actually having to live every possible life. In that sense, stories are almost like emotional flight simulators. They let us practice being human. Number 9. That's why fictional characters can genuinely help us to become better people. A particularly powerful character can become an internal reference point of sorts. Years later, you might encounter a situation and suddenly think, what would he do? What would she do? Or he wouldn't let someone treat him like this. Or even, I want to have her courage. And then something very interesting has happened. The character has moved from being an external fictional object into your internal psychological landscape. You have incorporated part of their imagined personality into your own framework for navigating life. They aren't literally influencing you because they're real, but they're influencing you because you made meaning from them. Number 10. We often love characters because they're psychologically legible. Real people are messy. You can love someone for years and still not understand why they do certain things. Fictional characters, however, are constructed. You get their backstory, you understand their motivations, you see the wound that caused the behavior, you watch the transformation. That can make them feel extraordinarily emotionally satisfying, especially when the story gives you the sense of, I understand you. And humans have a profound desire to understand and be understood. Number 11. The flawed character phenomenon is particularly powerful. Perfect characters are often less compelling than contradictory ones. We see this all the time actually. Someone who is kind but arrogant, brave but terrified, loving but emotionally avoidant, selfless but resentful, powerful but deeply insecure. All of these feel psychologically rich because that's how we as actual humans work. We aren't a collection of virtues or collections of virtues. We're contradictions. So, when a character's flaws make sense within their history, we experience something like recognition plus curiosity plus empathy. And sometimes we recognize ourselves. Number 12. We can fall in love with fictional characters because attraction isn't purely physical. Attraction can be generated by narrative information. You don't just see a character, you learn them, their voice, their humor, their worldview, their vulnerability, their competence, their loyalty, their little habits, their relationships with other people, their growth, their private pain. All of these things can create attraction. In fact, fiction can produce a very concentrated version of attraction because the story selectively gives you the traits designed to make you understand and care about the character. It is essentially curated intimacy. Number 13. And there is something wonderfully paradoxical about fictional love. We know that the character isn't real, yet the emotion is real. That is an important distinction. The person isn't real, the relationship isn't reciprocal, but the tenderness you experienced, real. The tears, real. The insight, real. The change in your worldview, real. The courage that you gained, real. The memory, real. That's why saying they're fictional so your feelings aren't real doesn't quite capture what's happening. The object of the emotion is fictional. The human experience of the emotion isn't. And perhaps the most beautiful reason of all, sometimes a character arrives in your life at exactly the right moment. You encounter them when you're lonely, or confused, or growing, grieving, or trying to understand love, trying to figure out who you are, and suddenly their story gives language to something inside you that you couldn't name. You don't necessarily remember them because they were just a good character. You remember them because you met them during a particular version of yourself. And when you revisit them years later, you may discover something almost magical. The character hasn't changed, but you have. Suddenly, you understand a line differently. You sympathize with a character that you once hated. You notice a flaw that you previously romanticized. You realize you no longer identify with the protagonist. Or you suddenly understand why you loved someone so intensely. That's when fiction becomes more than just entertainment. It becomes a mirror, a rehearsal space, a moral laboratory, a source of companionship, and sometimes a map for becoming yourself. And honestly, I think one of the most interesting questions one can ask about a fictional character that we're deeply attached to is, what does my love for this character actually reveal about the person I am and the person I'm becoming? And that answer can be actually so wildly revealing. And maybe this is part of why otome games can affect us so deeply. Using Love and Deepspace as an example, they aren't simply just asking us to watch someone else's love story unfold. We're invited to participate in it. We make choices, we spend time with the characters, we hear their voices, learn their fears, and we slowly build a relationship with them. Even though we know they're fictional, our brains are still being given something that feels remarkably close to emotional connection. Truly, we're not just simply watching these characters from a distance. We're spending time with them, we choose them, we listen to them, we learn them. Somewhere along the way, a character whose merely began as pixels and dialogue can start to feel like a small, strangely precious part of our lives. So maybe when we say that we miss Valco, we're not being silly. Maybe we're missing the conversations, the comfort, the anticipation, the feeling of being wanted by someone who seemed to understand us. Maybe we're missing not only him, but the version of ourselves that existed while we were with him from what we did see of him. Otome games can offer a particularly concentrated form of attachment because they're designed around sustained interaction, voice, personalization, anticipation, and romantic progression. So it makes perfect sense that someone can feel more attached to an otome character than to a character that they merely watched in a film, for example. So, my darling flower, the next time that you feel so deeply about a fictional character, know that your feelings are valid and what you are feeling is very real, even if the character does not exist in real life. We have seen this countless times, and we will use our own darling Valko as an example just to refresh our memory. But most of us who are here on this video probably already know about this. Valko's cancellation had such a profound impact on everybody that resonated with him, both online and offline. Online, he exists as fan fiction, in fan art, in beautiful letters which Valkyries have written for him across the globe. And when it comes to offline, we know the amazing charitable acts that our fellow Valkyries have taken upon themselves to do such good things in his name, as we know, saving an extinct wolf species, providing shelters for not only wolves but for women and dogs as well, providing flood relief, and I'm sure many more valiant efforts across the globe that are still happening to this day in memory of our darling Valko. Okay, so that's all I kind of wanted to talk about, and I just want you to know that you are not alone. And just like other Valkyries worldwide, I also miss Valko to this day. I want to hold out hope that he will return one day, but I also don't want to set myself up for heartbreak. You know what I'm saying? I already felt like I experienced a different type of heartbreak when they cancelled him on June 30th this year. So I really don't want to delude myself into this false sense of hope that he might come back, though I still want to hold on to the hope that he will. Whenever I see other Valkyries uplifting me and uplifting each other that, you know, he will come back, I really want to continue to believe that. And even, God forbid, if he doesn't, there are so many other ways in which we are choosing to keep him alive, and he will forever remain alive in our hearts, inside of the game, outside of the game. We will never stop talking about him because he was one of the best things to come along in our journey of Love and Deepspace, and we will never ever allow him to be erased. He will never be erased. He will always be remembered. We will always be fighting for our kin until the very end. We will always be howling for love in our tameless territory, where our Wolfie is always with us, no matter what. Sincerely hope you enjoyed another episode of this late night rambling session between you and I, my darling Valkyrie and Flower. Thank you so much for listening. Sweet dreams if you are going to sleep, and I will see you and your darling self in the next video. Bye bye.